Welcome to Mentoring in Real Life, where we talk about what it takes to find and be a great mentor. I'm Angela, and together with my co-host Bill, we know the power of mentoring and what it can do in your life on both sides of the table. If you're interested in learning tips, tricks, and hearing stories about mentoring, you're in the right place. Come join us. Hey, Bill.
Hey, Angela. Good to see you again.
Today, we wanted to talk about how to find a mentor. So a lot of what we're going to be talking about is from the mentees experience. First of all, finding a mentor. What if you don't know what career goals you might have? Bill, what would you recommend for somebody who's in that space?
Well, for me, it always seemed appropriate to go find somebody whose career you respect and somebody that you find resonates with the values that you have in life and seems to have their stuff together, somebody that you admire because there's some chance that they have some experience and they have the skill set to provide you some guidance to sort of work through with you what's important to you. You're not looking for somebody to tell you what to do. You're looking for somebody to work through that discussion with you and help you get to a place to help you set your priorities, not for them to set it for you, but to work through and be sort of that dispassionate third party who can say, so let's talk about, what are you passionate about in your career and what is it you want out of your life and what kinds of things are you trying to achieve? I think you can find those people. It's typically not the youngest people, it may not have to be the oldest one. And I'm not saying that because I'm the guy with gray hair in this conversation. I'm just saying if you're trying to figure out what you want to do with your life, it's helpful to find somebody who has lived a lot of their life and has maybe some success that you recognize, you admire, and you appreciate, and work through with them how they got to that place.
And it could be somebody that is in a role that you might want to take on someday, and it might not be.
Absolutely true. That's why I didn't pick somebody who's doing exactly what you are doing as that person, but it is somebody whose success you admire and whose approach to life you admire, having nothing to do with the very specific job that they're performing.
Mm-hmm. So for those that are interested in getting more senior leader roles inside of a company, the Talent Management Institute, which I highly recommend folks look into, a lot of their products and such, they talk about for senior leaders within companies, typically having a breadth of knowledge and experiences. And specifically, they talk about 70% of that senior leader development is in experiences, what kind of projects they have had, what kind of assignments they've had. 20% is in growth and feedback. And this is where a lot of mentoring actually comes in. So 20% of a person's development is in a mentoring, often also coaching kind of relationship. 10% is really formal training and education outside of what they've had in their basic education, getting to the point where they've actually gotten to in their careers to date. And so when you think about that and you think about what kind of experiences you might have and taking stock as a mentee about what kind of experiences you've had to date, that also might help you in defining what kind of mentor you want. So if a person's leadership is really based on their raw materials, how much intellect they have, what's their character like, what's their ability to relate, what's their motivation to achieve and lead, and then you add in their experience and specifically looking at their variety of experiences, their intensity of each of their experiences, what kind of adversity they've had in their career experiences, as well as diversity of experiences. And then you add in their ability and willingness to learn from feedback, taking feedback in and taking action on that feedback. That really helps an individual define where there might be gaps in their career and actually define and help identify where they might need help and support and what kind of mentor they'd like.
I think that's a great summary. And you mentioned specifically character and intensity and their experiences of adversity in their own careers. That kind of transparency and resonating with that, I think, is just a critical part of finding a mentor with whom you're going to find some common ground. It's just going to get more and more important the more you deeply dive into it. the more it's going to be apparent that you're looking for somebody who has a similar approach in life skills that you either have or would like to have. And so I think that that summary that you just gave captured a lot of that. And I think it's worth really thinking about how you want to find that mentor, because I think one of the conversations we want to have today also includes, so when you're picking them, what if do you need to like them and so forth? And so before we get to liking or not, you certainly have to respect them. And so that respect is going to come based on your observations of how they act in life and how they act in their career, and whether or not that character and that set of values resonates with you. Whether you like them or not, it's going to become very secondary to, do I actually respect that person? Is that the kind of person I would like to become? And not necessarily in that specific job, but the way that they are in their career. And so that's why I started off by saying, find somebody who you admire and would like to, chase your dreams with the same set of values and character that that person has. I think your summary captured that with all diversity of experience and dealing with adversity, and all those pieces that I think are critical to finding somebody who's going to resonate with your own ideals.
Hmm. So, Bill, throughout your career, you didn't stay in one job and move up the chain from there and have just one type of experience. What can you tell us about the breadth of your own experience?
Well, and I'm going to start off by saying, of course, I spent a lot of time on active duty, and that's not to say that everybody needs to be in the military. It is to say that there's early in your career, certainly early in my career, I learned what it is to work hard, and I learned what it is to live through some very, very difficult times, which put me in a very good place as I moved up through the chain of command. And so there was the military piece of it that trained me well. When I transferred to being a civilian, I immediately became a project manager. Now, did my military training in the engineering department of a ship really help me there? Not the engineering experience, as far as, there weren't a lot of steam engines when I got to the place where I spent the rest of my career, which was an IT organization. What I did know, however, was the learning that I did early in my career said, you do whatever it takes to get the job done. That became very, very clear to me. And so that served me quite well, even when I completely changed industries. As a project manager, you do what it takes to get the job done. And that doesn't mean just getting money in and getting people to get the work done. It also meant simple stuff, which I came to appreciate from my earlier days of my career. As I was going up the chain, now I'm going to manage people. That doesn't mean I'm above the work that they're doing. And what I mean when I say that, I can't make coffee because I'm a project manager now, or I can't set up the tables for the meeting, or I can't go out and get the napkins and the plates because we're going to have lunch. I can do anything it takes to get the job done. And so that learning experience from early in the career translated immediately over and served me well throughout my career. From the time I was a brand new project manager to when I became a division head, and I would bring food in for people, and I was happy to set up the coffee for the meetings. And it meant coming in early and getting things started because it was a big meeting. It's like, so what? So you do what it takes, and you're not above that kind of stuff. On occasion, somebody would say, you're paid too much money to do those jobs. And I would argue that that's not actually a healthy way to look at stuff. If everybody's around and you can get some help to do that, sure, hand it to somebody who's more junior and let them do that while you're taking care of something else. But if it meant I had to come in before everybody else did to get the work done, not only did it get something done and I wasn't getting paid for those hours, and because I was there before working hours, it also sent a very strong message to the people on the team. And so that messaging that said he's not above doing whatever it takes to get the job actually is a really healthy message for everybody on the team. Nobody's above the work. And so that diversity of experience, certainly when I started out in the Navy, I wasn't the guy in charge, and I wasn't the guy at the bottom either, but I was probably the least knowledgeable when I got there. And so being willing to learn from all the people around me, people who had been there much, much longer, who I was in charge of because I was an officer, but everybody knows that there are much more senior enlisted people who know what the right things to do are and what work needs to be done, and learning to listen to those folks and learning to respect all of the people on the team. That diversity served me well throughout my entire career, throughout my life.
Mhm.
Thinking you're the smartest person in the room is just foolishness. It's likely that everybody else in the room is smarter than you about something.
I think that if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
I like that. I like that a lot.
Well, and thinking about diversity and adversity of experiences and such, it just reminds me of, first of all, in my own career, I did everything from building aircraft kind of from scratch, taking old aircraft and refurbishing it, to environmental programs to figure out how we could use land, and having partnerships with the Nature Conservancy and the FAA and different groups of folks that were outside of the Department of Defense entirely. And then coming into IT systems and getting more familiar with IT systems specifically and having a ton of jobs associated with those. But then not just that type of work, but also diversity in who the customers were. So we might have had customers that were specific to one agency as well as other agencies, joint programs, and so on. So you get diversity of what those requirements look like and how to navigate those systems, which each and every system is a little different. And I'm not just talking about IT systems, I'm talking about the systems to receive funding. How do we deal with this dynamic team that we have? And those kind of diversity of experiences as well. That really helps get some breadth of experience, as well as often the intensity changes too, because when you're plucked and put onto a high paced projects versus something that's in more sustainment kind of mode, that gives some breadth of experience on how to handle across the spectrum of when a capability is delivered, whether it's early and it's just an idea. Research hasn't been conducted on it. There's been no prototypes of it or anything like that, all the way to an operating system. That really gives some breadth of experience as well.
Unquestionable. You certainly brought up for me when I became the project manager for my first job as a civilian. I was taking over for somebody. So it's one thing to run a project where it's actually already an automatic. So don't screw it up and try to improve it as you go. But 10 years later, somebody gave me a call out of the blue and said, Bill, how would you like to be part of this brand new program? There is no capability and we need to develop it. And you're going to have to grow a big team to do it, and so on and so forth. And for the first 2 years of it, I was a project of one. And I know you're going to find it very hard to believe. I was the IT expert in the room, which should scare lots of people. And I found out often when I went back to Washington, D.C., I clearly was the technical expert in the room, which is also very, very disconcerting. But like you said, it's very healthy to get those experiences where you're birthing an idea and turning it into some sort of a new program or a new capability. That diversity and that the discomfort that comes with, you want me to do what? Well, how do you do that? We don't know. We're asking you to do that, Bill. You talk about being uncomfortable with new assignments. There was extreme discomfort going along with that, but also great excitement. And so, it always reminds me of a guy whose leadership role I very much respected. It happens to be the coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Mike Tomlin told his players very, very clearly and tells them regularly, get comfortable being uncomfortable. I actually think that applies to anybody who's looking for mentorship and who wants to grow their career. If you're comfortable 24/7 your job, you're not growing much.
Hmm.
And so when you're looking for a mentor, it's typically because you want to grow. I would imagine most of your mentors are going to say, so I'd like you to look into this and I'd like you to try this and I'd like you to try something very different. I want you to go pursue these different skill sets and you may not be comfortable. Okay. Get comfortable being uncomfortable if you really want to grow.
That's right. And so the first step that we'd ask mentees to do is to take stock of your experiences in your career. Where are you strong and where are you lacking in your experience? Because that will help drive the conversation that you have with your prospective mentor.
Absolutely. I don't know how you get your head around that without taking the time to actually write down where you think you are,
Hmm.
followed quickly by where do you think you want to go? The discussion that's going to drive the kinds of mentors you were going to pursue, of course, is what kind of job would you like to have? And there are people who plan their careers, I'm sure, who have a really good idea on day one of their new career where they want to be in 20 or 25 years. But it's probably more reasonable to say, I'd like to think about where I want to be maybe 5 years from now. and have that in mind as you go looking for your mentor, because that will drive the kinds of people you're going to need help from to achieve some of those goals in those early days. So that the first person we talked about, sort of that life mentor, yeah, they might be able to talk to you in much broader discussions about where you want to go in life. But as you narrow down to a career conversation, wherever you are today, where would you like to be in 5 years? And write that down. And if I was mentoring you, I'd tell you that you need to actually write it down. Don't just ramble. Write stuff down and see if it still resonates when you read it. So I think those are important calls to action. What skills do you have? What skills do you need to get where you want to go?
And recognize that you might be more interested in a technical path for the next 5 years.
Maybe.
That will mean a totally different type of mentor potentially than if you wanna take more of a management chain and become more in the not in the technical leadership chain, but rather the management leadership chain. That will give you a totally different mentor conversation and experience and potentially skills that you might wanna develop depending on which direction you wanna take.
Unquestionably. But I don't think you want to restrict yourself by only selecting one possible path. Because my bet is if you're technically driven in whatever your specialty is, and you think that's all you want to do, generally speaking, I would bet that if you looked at anybody who is a technical specialist in whatever field, if you looked at them 15, 20 years hence, they're probably not doing exactly what they were doing when they first started. And so you can talk about specific mentors for your 5 year plan, but you might want to think about broadening your base of mentors to include people that you might want to talk to about what happens further down the path. And I think that often will be, I need to expand my thinking about what it is I want out of my career. Is 5 years the end of my career? Probably not. You might want to be talking to a broader base of folks.
Mhm. I love to think about the concept of a board of mentors or a board of directors that really helps expose you to various aspects of your career, and it gives you much different perspective depending on who you ask. But we can get into the board of mentors concept in just a little bit.
Sure.
Before we get there, I'm curious what your thoughts are about mentors in your leadership or management chain versus outside of it.
Well, so I I think that the folks who are in your direct chain, they have a mentoring role, but they also have a supervisory role. And so that's going to be a different conversation, I would submit, than one you would have with somebody who is not in your direct supervisory chain. And so I think it's healthy to have a relationship with your supervisor chain that helps you talk about where you want to go in your career and whether or not the performance that you're doing would support that. But it's not going to be quite the same conversation as somebody who doesn't control your paycheck, who doesn't write your evaluation, and it's not going to be as candid. Suppose Bill's working for Angela and he says, in his mind, he's saying, I don't really want to work for her the rest of my life. I want to work over in this other division somewhere. Okay, well, am I going to spend a lot of time telling her if she's the one who controls my evaluation and she's the one who controls my paycheck? Or might I want to have a mentor that's somebody outside that chain to talk about where I want to go? And so I think it's okay for it to have a good, healthy relationship with feedback and talking about career growth generally with your supervisor. But when we talk about mentors, I typically am thinking about somebody who is not a direct supervisor.
It's not just somebody who's not a direct supervisor. It could be somebody who's in a totally different element within the company or even a different company altogether.
Yes,
If you're an engineer, but you're interested in getting in sales, maybe get a sales mentor. If you're
absolutely.
if you're an engineer and wanting to get into project management, maybe get a project management mentor.
I couldn't agree more. And so you're obviously chasing mentors who likely are in areas where you would like to go. That has serves two functions. One is that they understand what it takes to get there. And second, you're actually now giving them an opportunity to say, oh, you're looking to become one of the people in our group. That's going to be now a different relationship than you would have had if it was randomly talking about, I just want to grow my career. So it serves two purposes by finding that person in that area. Not only are you getting the benefit of their experience and their skill set, you also are making the connection with somebody, you've just increased your position in line to move into that organization and maybe even move up in that organization as time goes by when career promotion opportunities come up and you're already working with that person as a mentor. Gee, that might be helpful as you grow your career.
Doors might open easily.
Yeah, why wouldn't they? Now they know you, they respect you, they think you're doing a great job. They're in conversations with you about what you want, and if that resonates with what they're looking for, you've just positioned yourself quite well.
Mhm.
And I'm not talking about faking it, by the way. The transparency and the honesty and being straight up with folks is totally legit. If you're making up stuff to tell these people because you just want to move over there, they're going to see through that stuff.
Right. Being authentic is important.
Yeah, I mean, I think that word gets overused these days, but if you actually mean it in the real meaning of the word and you're being candid and honest and looking for real feedback, yeah, okay, so that works.
Mhm.
But if you're trying to be authentic by trying to say things you think they want to hear as opposed to the things that you actually feel, they'll see through that too.
Absolutely. So we're submitting to our mentees, our potential mentees here, a call to action to go find mentors in the sphere you'd like to get into your career. It might not be what you're in right now, but maybe you'd like to get some breadth of experience in another element. Find mentors in that other part of the organization, and that'll really help open some doors.
Absolutely. Okay, so one thing comes to mind, and because I know you and I have had conversations about these things before, as you're looking for mentors. There's clearly in many industries, and in the industry in which we found ourselves, there are places that are dominated by specific genders. And so when I talk about the military, for decades, even centuries, it was dominated by guys. There's no
I
question.
didn't notice that.
Yeah, I'll bet you didn't. And so, you know, so the question, if I'm in that kind of industry where it actually has a gender bias, at least in numbers. I'm not talking about a gender bias in people in specific people. I'm saying just look at the statistics. There's a whole bunch of guys in that industry and not many women. How do you look for mentors when you don't have any role models who happen to be females in that industry? And my bet is you have some experience in that domain, and it's
I
probably be
do.
valuable.
I do. Yes, it's for my entire career, actually, since I was an undergraduate student, I've been in a male dominated field. And it's been a learning experience to try to find mentors that would be supportive of wherever I am in my career. And I have a few thoughts on that. One is even if you're in my case, male dominated industry, I also had to recognize that if I wanted a seat around the table, I'd have to be willing to talk to the people who are sitting around the table, regardless of what gender they are,
Good call.
regardless of what kind of experiences they've had. If I wanted to be at the table, then I had to get comfortable in having conversations with people who are sitting around the table. And so that caused me to ask for mentoring from people who weren't my same gender, weren't women. And I had a lot of mentors who were men who actually helped me in various ways and gave me very candid feedback on what I was doing well and what I could be doing better to grow in my career. And lo and behold, many of them actually helped me open doors in my career in gaining additional experiences and gaining that breadth that's needed to actually become a senior leader. So, first, it's getting uncomfortable in knowing you're going to have conversations with people who are perhaps not your same gender. The other piece to recognize is once you start gaining that experience, then you've got to pay it forward to the people who might be coming up below you who really also want to have female mentors. So in my case, actually mentoring younger women was a hugely important role. And it helps for a number of reasons. It helps when you have more experience. One of my mentees who's in her 20s sent me an article about the importance of having women who are in their 40s, and I'm barely still there, but
I'm not the guy that's going to call you out on that. Are you kidding me?
hanging on to that for as long as I can. But how important it is to have mentors that are essentially a couple of decades or a generation above. And the reason is that they have wisdom that they can share with you that you may not otherwise get. You also don't necessarily have competition. You're not going for the same roles. And so finding that ability to find folks that you want to be your mentors who you could leverage and learn from, who you might not be trying to compete for their same job right now, but you want to learn from them. You want to learn their wisdom. That's actually really important, regardless, again, of gender. Before, I also talked about the idea of a board of mentors. You might not have somebody that you want to mimic. You won't become a carbon copy of anybody more senior to you. You're going to learn in your career how you want to show up. And so the idea of a board of mentors includes people from various experiences who you have respect for, like we've talked about before, various experiences, various walks of life potentially, but that you can really leverage and get advice from. And you might ask each of them the same question. You might ask each of them for help in a specific area, a specific skill set you want to develop. But your board of mentors means that you don't have a single mentor who's opposite, gender to you or totally different experiences. It means that you have multiple people that you can leverage and count on for gaining mentorship conversations and really learning from their wisdom.
Yeah, I need to share something that builds on that conversation and the conversation about women working in male-dominated organizations. Some of the most gratifying times as a mentor that I had were, in fact, with women who had come into the organization and were looking around in my more junior days when they would say, "Well, it's an old boy network, and I don't have a chance." And working with them and seeing them succeed, because as a guy who'd been there for a little bit longer, I could see lots of great skill sets, and I could see that they could advance in the organization clearly because they were willing to do the work that was necessary to do so. And so, as you talk about looking across and not always, your role models may not be your same gender. And in fact, one of my mentors was my predecessor in my last senior job, happened to be a female who had been there longer than anybody else at the lab had ever been in that position. And she was terrific and incredibly skilled and a great leader. But I got to pass that on as I was growing through my career and watch women who would come into the conversation with me as a mentor and say, well, I know I can't do this, or I know I can't do that. And my only comment with those people was, that's because you say you can't. I'm telling you, you have absolutely no boundaries. You can tell me that you do. I'm telling you, you can grow, and you can get all those things that you've discussed wanting out of your career. And to watch them grow and achieve those things was probably some of the most fun I had as a mentor. And so the good news is, if you're watching this and you're a potential mentor, trust me, you'll get great reward out of seeing people who don't see their own potential and helping them achieve that. So there's great value for a mentee finding somebody who they respect, who can help them walk through those struggles and overcome all these barriers, many of which are internally imposed.
Mhm.
But there aren't a bunch of women who've made that transition. That's not a reason that you can't. I mean, and particularly if certainly you could probably somewhere find a company who won't let women grow in their career. Certainly in the old days, you could easily find that. But that's less and less likely now. If you're putting those barriers in front of yourself, they're often self-imposed barriers that actually aren't real.
Mhm.
And so, to your point, finding people who will help you work through all that almost without regard to gender is going to be critical for this search.
Mhm. Yeah. When we're talking about building this cohort of mentors, this board of mentors, we've talked already in this conversation about the importance of respecting those folks. What do we mean by respect? Like how do we define that?
Well, so for me, that comes down to respecting the values that they demonstrate in their actions at work. Generally speaking, you're not going to necessarily know what their actions are in their personal life, certainly not when you're looking for a mentor. As you get to know them, you may share all kinds of stories between mentor and mentee. But in the early days, when you're looking, it's respecting the way that they come to work and the values that they demonstrate, not just that they say, but they demonstrate in their actions at work. And I think you do have to respect your mentor in that sense. I didn't say you necessarily have to like them. Like, boy, I can't go wait to go out and have a drink with those people after work. That's not what I'm talking about. Talking about that's a person that I would like to model my behaviors at work after. Those are good behaviors. They show good character. They show a set of values that resonates with me. Because if you can't get past that part, I don't know how you have a meaningful mentoring relationship. You should want to match up your core professional values. Let's leave personal off to the side for a second and just say, yeah, I think it's really important that you respect how they come to work and how they present themselves at work, how they conduct themselves at work.
And so we've asked our listeners to take stock of their experiences to date and really get an understanding about where they've had some strength in their experiences and where they may be lacking in it. We've asked them to come to the table with a list of skills that they might want to develop and what skills that they might be looking for in a mentor. How then they've now come up with all of this and they've maybe identified a few senior leaders that they'd like to ask if they'd be willing to be their mentor. How do they go about that?
Yeah, so this is a very healthy conversation. And my bet is that you could ask a bunch of different people and you might get a bunch of different answers. I've always been a fan of the very, very straightforward approach. If there's a way that you can find to be with them at some meeting and say, hey, can I talk to you for a second after the meeting breaks up? To me, that's like the best way to do it, face to face, as with any meaningful conversation as far as I'm concerned, to reach out and say, would you have some time to discuss being a mentor of mine? And if not, to discuss people that you'd recommend. I think the face to face approach is the way to get there, the easiest way to get there, the strongest way to get there. If that's just never going to present itself, but there is somebody you're trying to reach out to, and if they're really, really senior and they have an administrative assistance, I would reach out to the administrative assistant to see if I could get some time on their calendar. Failing that, I would send an email to them that says what we just talked about a second ago, that says, I would be very interested to have a conversation with you about being a mentor. And if you don't have the time, about people that you would recommend as good mentors as I try to grow my career. So I almost always default to face, finding a way to be face to face. I heard some recommendations that were pretty good actually in other from other mentoring podcasts and so forth that talk about finding ways to volunteer in organizations, professional organizations, where you would get a chance to meet people who are typically not at your level. So any way that you can find that's legitimate to talk to somebody face to face, I think is a very, very valuable approach. If you have to fall back to email, sure, go to email because I mean, better to try and at least have a shot at it. If you're sitting there and you never reach out, okay, well, they're never going to be your mentors. I guess face to face first, failing that, email,
You miss all the shots you don't take, right?
something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Not only that, but it's entirely possible that you're going to have to, stalking might be a strong word. Make yourself available
You
to
say
this.
like stalking is a bad thing.
Make yourself available to the senior leader at a time that's convenient for them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, as the mentee, you need to accommodate their schedule. I would agree with that.
hmm So it's entirely possible that you may not be in meetings with them. Their email might be so slammed that sending them an email is like sending it to a black hole. Well, it's entirely possible that towards the end of a workday or at the very beginning of a workday, you got to come in early or you got to stay late and sit outside their office, knock politely on their door. And in a virtual environment, this might look like shooting them a chat message that hopefully they can access at the end of a meeting. Or what would be some ways in a virtual environment, do you think, to
Well,
connect with a senior leader?
well, chat is, in my personal experience, chat was a great way because the email, the more senior I got, the more overwhelming the number of emails that I got in any given day. It was overwhelming enough that I had help going through my inbox. There was a person who helped me do that and track which are the ones I really need to get to and which ones are just info and et cetera. And so in the virtual environment, chat was a quick way that I was likely going to see. And if I wasn't going to see it, chatting with my admin assistant saying I would like to get on his calendar was actually a very effective way to do it.
hmm
And so I think those are reasonable. You know, saying, "Hey, can I get your phone number so I could text message you?" That may be a little bit over that top stalking line we were talking about. But chatting on the company chat system, sure, I think that's okay. I would make it very, very short to start.
Mhm.
You don't want to tell them your whole life story in the first chat that you send.
No, you're asking, I would love to have a conversation with you about your availability to be my mentor. And if you can't, if you don't have the time for it, do you have somebody that you might recommend?
Yep, I
Simple
think
as that.
I totally agree with that. And I think that's legitimate. That's really the message, whether you're sitting outside their office or you're chatting with them or you're sending them an email or talking to their admin assistant. That's really the message that you're trying to get for that first conversation.
So now you're on their calendar and you're going to have your first conversation with them. How to structure that discussion.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're the mentee, you need to own this one. And this is probably very uncomfortable. So, once again, get comfortable being uncomfortable. You should be driving this process. I mean, they're going to help you, but they aren't responsible for your career. You're responsible for your career. And presuming they've put the time aside, they're interested in your career and they're going to be very helpful. But you're going to walk in there and you need to be able to talk about, so what have you done up to now? And anything that in your personal life that you think contributes to what you want to do professionally. And you don't have to tell them your entire life story, but sometimes children are part of the conversation. You don't have to tell them all about your kids, but either I want to have kids or I have kids. And so I want to do this, but I know I'm bounded in these ways for the next 5 years until they get out of high school, or, I'm making it up, but that's anything that contributes to the conversation about your availability to do the things necessary to grow your career. Can you travel? And, do you have some education stuff that you're working on? Or no, I actually don't have time for that, but I'm trying to grow my expertise in this different area. And so that sort of interest background, you should be ready for that. In fact, you should bring that as you walk in, because I can tell you, again, from personal experience, that my initial part is, so tell me why you wanted to come see me, and off you go. Okay, so do you have any idea what your goals are going to be? And yes, you do. No, you don't. I have 5-year goals. I have 20-year goals. I got no goals. If you got no goals, don't bother your mentor. But if you have an idea of where you want to go, at least in the early stages, that's a great thing to sit down and talk about. And, what are you trying to get out of this? And then, off you go. I mean, I think that's a great way to start. And it shows then that you thought about what you're trying to get after and why you came to see them, as opposed to, I don't really want to know what I want to do. So what do you think I should do, Bill? Okay, that's not a healthy start to that conversation.
Mhm.
Because I would actually say, if I perceived that they were somebody I still wanted to mentor, my comment would be, okay, go back and fill in all the blanks I just talked about and come back with a plan for how you'd like to approach this.
Mhm. Yeah. And adding on that, another thought is, since you've already done the action of looking at your career to date and what experiences you've had and what breadth of experiences you're lacking in potentially, that could easily be part of the initial conversation. And when you talk about what you'd like to get out of the mentoring relationship, it's an acknowledgement that here's my background to date. I'm realizing that I'm lacking in X, Y, and Z. I've been a project manager without experience in actually developing a contract from scratch. I'd like to do that
Right.
as an example. Or I haven't been a supervisor. I haven't had direct leadership experience outside of indirect team development. I'd like to work on that. So getting some clarity about where you're lacking in experiences can also help drive the conversation.
Absolutely.
So you've had this first conversation. How do you wrap it up?
Well, the step one in any continuing relationship. So when are we going to meet next?
That's right.
And so, and they don't have to give you their calendar that second. If they are going, again, senior enough to have an admin assistant, I'll be happy to work with your assistant to make sure that I get on your calendar for a month from now, and sort of agree to what we would call in the military call the battle rhythm, the periodic nature of these engagements, so that you have in mind how often are we going to meet and for how long. And then, so in the next meeting, these are the things I would like to address, and give the mentor an opportunity to say, that sounds good, or, well, before we get to that, let's address these other things first, or whatever the mentor wants to make as an input. So when are we going to meet next? And what are we going to talk about?
When are we going to meet next? How do I get on your calendar?
Yeah.
Maybe it is through an admin assistant. Maybe they control their own calendar and you look for an opening and they give some parameters around it, like only do it on Wednesday afternoons or
Sure.
Friday mornings or whatever it might be. They might give you some parameters, but how do I get on your calendar? And then this is what I'd like to talk about next time we meet. Throughout this conversation, then, Bill, what we've talked about is really from the mentee's perspective, how to find a mentor. The first thing we talked about is really taking stock of your career experiences and where a mentor might help you expand them and get you aligned to your goals, what skills you might want to grow in, making sure you can get clear on why you want a mentor and what you want out of the mentoring relationship. You put together a list of potential mentors and you reach out to them either through face-to-face is ideal. Asking for time on their calendar through their assistant is another way. Sending them an email is kind of last on the list to ask for time for a person to be your mentor. Maybe reaching out via chat. When you have that meeting, you come prepared. You don't come with a blank sheet. You come prepared as the mentee with general background experience, general discussion with the mentor about why you like his or her mentorship and what you could get out of it, and see if they have any advice for you at that point. And you are prepared to set up the subsequent recurring discussions that you might have with him or her. What did I miss from our conversation?
I was going to say, I wish you would have told me that before the first time I asked for a mentor. Okay, I could have used that information.
Well, I thought you meant before the first time I asked you for a mentoring conversation.
No, I thought that was a very good wrap up for preparing for this. One thing occurred to me as you were talking that I would be very, very specific with my mentor about, and maybe it goes without saying, but I'm not sure. And that is making sure that the mentor knows that you're not only open to feedback, but you are looking for feedback on where they are and what they need to do. And that you are hungry for that honesty and that candid feedback from somebody that you respect, as opposed to, they start to give you feedback and you become defensive or whatever else like that. That's not going to be helpful. And so you need to enter that relationship really, really looking for their opinion. You went to them because you respect them and you ought to be willing to listen to it. It doesn't mean you have to follow everything they said, but you should be hungry for that transparency that we talked about earlier.
That's
And
right.
you want to make sure they know that's how you're approaching this relationship.
Feedback is a gift.
Yeah. So please give me lots of gifts like you always did.
Continue to do so.
Yeah. I couldn't help noticing.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Mentoring in Real Life. Feel free to leave a comment with any questions you may have. If you liked what you heard, please rate this podcast, subscribe to it, and share it with a friend. Until next time, help others climb.